you focus on what's joy, what's love, what's empathy, what's compassion, how do I exchange my values, am I having fun, am I making a difference, and then the money comes from wherever it is at the moment.
Most people have never heard of it. It was whispered about in corridors hung with velvet and gold, passed hand to hand beneath candlelight, and spoken of only in hushed voices. The year was 1549, and the book in question was called Liber Fortunae, the noble path to divine wealth. While countless grimoires and alchemical texts were copied, burned, or altered throughout the ages, this one remained protected, kept not by priests but by nobles. Not because it was dangerous, but because it worked. The Secrets of Liber Fortunae. Liber Fortunae was not a spell book in the traditional sense. It didn't claim to summon spirits or turn lead into gold. Its secrets were more refined. It taught the art of alignment, how to position one's mind, body, and spirit in harmony with the energetic current of abundance. It spoke of wealth not as coins or titles, but as a river, always flowing, always near, if only the seeker could learn how to feel its rhythm. Aristocrats from England to the courts of Italy swore by it. They didn't just read it, they lived it. And those who truly understood its secrets never lost their power, even when fortunes turned. The book itself began with a declaration: gold is not given, it is drawn, and that which is drawn must be magnetized by the soul. This, for many, was the first reversal in thinking. In the harsh world of the 16th century, where bloodlines mattered more than merit and poverty often meant punishment, Liber Fortunae offered a radical suggestion. That wealth was energetic. That wealth was not a gift from kings or fate, but something summoned from within. This is an idea we are only now remembering. But how did this book, lost in the dust of forgotten libraries, end up in the hands of noble families? The legend says it came from a wandering mystic who had studied both in Moorish Spain and the eastern deserts. Some say he was part of the Hermetic lineage. Others whisper he had studied with Sufi sages who understood the invisible threads between love, surrender, and plenty. What's clear is this: the mystic was not selling gold. He was awakening people to the alchemy of their own energy. At the heart of the book was a principle that echoed what modern thinkers like Nikola Tesla would later call vibration. Everything is frequency. Wealth, too, has a tone, a hum, a rhythm. Those who mastered this could enter rooms and change the energy. They attracted partnerships, opportunities, and allies without lifting a finger. Not because they chased, but because they resonated. This is one of the great truths that Liber Fortunae whispers through the centuries. Wanting repels, embodiment attracts. One parable in the book told the story of a noble woman whose estate had begun to collapse. Crops failed, debts grew, and servants left. She sought the help of scholars and priests, but no one could shift her misfortune. Finally, in her desperation, she retreated to a small cottage on her land and began meditating on the teachings of Liber Fortunae. There, she stopped asking for riches. She began feeling herself as someone whose nature was wealthy. She gave away the few trinkets she had left, walked barefoot through her fields, and blessed every stone, every tree. Within months, her fortunes turned. Buyers appeared, water flowed again, her land grew fertile. The lesson wasn't that rituals worked like magic tricks. The lesson was that wealth responds to frequency. This noble woman shifted her entire inner field, and the outer world mirrored her. She didn't manipulate the world. She became the kind of person the world responds to. This, at its core, is what aristocrats understood. Money is not neutral. It responds. And just like the noble families of the 16th century, many of us have been trained to chase, to want, to plead. We were never taught to feel, never taught to sit in the energy of already having, because to sit in that energy is to call back your power. The book itself had practices, Some were quiet, sitting by candlelight and reciting invocations in Latin, not to some deity, but to the soul. Others were bolder, walking in gardens barefoot under the full moon, gifting a coin to a stranger in silence, keeping gold thread near the skin to remind the body of its nobility. These weren't about superstition, they were about reprogramming the frequency of the self. In a world where peasants were punished for stepping out of line, these nobles were training their spirits to command destiny. Much of this may sound fantastical, but pause for a moment and ask yourself, have the things you've been taught about money worked? Has the path of stress and striving ever brought true peace? Or have you felt, deep down, that something else must be possible, that maybe the soul already knows what the mind has forgotten? The teachings of Liber Fortunae weren't shared with everyone. They were passed in coded ways, woven into art, embedded in family crests, whispered through generations. But now, as the world begins to remember that energy is more real than matter, we are being invited to look again, not to copy the rituals, but to remember the frequency they were pointing to. We will return to what aristocrats quietly practiced while pretending to bow to kings. We will relearn how to walk in the world like the source of wealth itself, not its beggar. Because if Liber Fortunae is right, and if energy always responds to resonance, then the life you've been seeking isn't hiding from you. Now, it's time to delve into the secrets of the book. Chapter 1. Divinitas Lucis, the light of divine fortune. The first lesson, Divinitas Lucis, speaks of the light. Not the light from candles or suns, but the inner light, the one that glows quietly when we are calm, centered, and aligned with our purpose. The light of divine fortune, the book says, does not rush. It waits, and what is meant for it comes. This light must be cultivated, not by toil, but by attention. When your thoughts are in harmony, when your heart is not clouded by envy, fear, or desperation, the light grows stronger, and the stronger it becomes, the more the outer world bends to it. In that way, the book teaches the opposite of striving. It teaches reversal. Where others run outward, you turn inward. Where others demand, you become receptive. It echoes spiritual truths found across the globe, from the Taoist principle of Wu Wei, effortless action, to the teachings of Jesus about seeking the kingdom within, not without. The monk who wrote Divinitas Lucis did not invent this wisdom. He simply listened closely to the silence where truth lives and translated it into a language the nobles of his time could understand. There is one story early in the book, written almost like a riddle. It tells of a nobleman who lost his fortune in war, his home burned, his titles stripped. He wandered for years until he met a hermit who lived in a cave behind a waterfall. The hermit gave him a task. Sit with your desire, but do not touch it. Do not run from it either. Let it burn in front of you, and let it burn away. The nobleman did as he was told. He sat. He waited. Days passed, then weeks. Then one morning he woke up to find a single gold coin beside him. The next day another, then a letter, then an opportunity. Slowly, without forcing anything, his life rebuilt itself, not as before, but better. The message was simple: to chase nothing, to align with everything. In our world today, this may sound too slow, too mystical, but the real secret is that it isn't about time, it's about vibration. The moment your energy shifts, the outer world begins to reflect it. This idea is not new. It's the very heart of Hermetic teachings, echoed in the Kybalion. As within, so without. As above, so below. And Tesla himself, centuries later, would say, if you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. It's almost as if he too had read Divinitas Lucis. So this is where we begin, with the light. The part of you that does not need anything to glow, that remembers who you are even when the world forgets, that knows in stillness how to call back everything that is already yours. Let others race, let others strive, but you are here to remember the light. As you turn the page, you'll find a drawing of a golden heart, starting the second chapter, Aurum Cordis. Chapter 2, Aurum Cordis, the gold of the heart. Long before coins glittered in vaults or titles were passed down through generations, the wealth of aristocrats was measured not only by what they possessed, but by the energy they knew how to hold. It was called Aurum Cordis, or the gold of the heart, and it wasn't about material gold. It was about the radiant field of energy that the heart emits, and how that field, when trained and strengthened, could influence the world in ways no army or coin ever could. The aristocrats who truly thrived didn't just inherit land or favor, they embodied a kind of inner power. According to Liber Fortunae, the noble path to divine wealth, this power could be cultivated like a garden, and the center of it was not the mind, but the heart. This might sound poetic, but it was deeply practical. Modern science has shown us that the heart has its own intelligence, even its own electromagnetic field, stronger than the brain's. But centuries ago, mystics and the elite alike already lived by this truth. They were taught to walk into any room with a calm, coherent heart. They were trained to breathe deeply, focus gently on gratitude, and remain internally still, even in the chaos of battle, politics, or negotiation. The book described this heart energy as the golden aura that magnetized resources, loyal allies, and unexpected good fortune. The chapter taught that desire must be purified through the heart before it becomes manifest. It warned against greedy longing, explaining that such energy repels what you want. Instead, the teachings guided readers to gently call in what they needed by becoming the vibration of it. That is, instead of wanting power, become still and generous. Instead of grasping for money, embody enoughness. This was the essence of Aurum Cordis. The heart, when filled with quiet confidence and sincere generosity, begins to radiate a frequency that naturally attracts abundance. The aristocrats who studied Liber Fortunae, the noble path to divine wealth, were trained not to force, not to hustle, but to become magnetic. Their wealth wasn't just inherited, it was invited, welcomed, and held through the silent strength of a heart in harmony. A common practice from the book was the ritual of inner gilding. Each morning, a noble practitioner would sit before a mirror, not for vanity, but to look into their own eyes until all thoughts began to fade. Then, they would place a hand over their heart and recall a moment of true joy or grace. They were instructed to feel it fully, until their chest felt light and warm. That warmth was what they believed to be the first flicker of Aurum Cordis's awakening. Once this glow was present, they would speak one desire, not with begging, but with quiet knowing, and then they would let it go, trusting it had already been heard. It was a simple ritual, but it created calm, clear leaders whose presence shifted the air itself. This is not so different from what many spiritual philosophies teach today. In Taoist tradition, the heart is seen as the seat of Shen, or spirit, and it must be calm for the person to see the path clearly. In certain Kabbalistic teachings, it is the heart that bridges the physical and the divine, the vessel through which blessings flow. And in the teachings of Jesus, it is the pure in heart who shall see God, another way of saying they become aligned with truth and can manifest it on earth. Carl Jung, centuries later, would call this the process of individuation, the alignment of the inner self with the divine archetype of wholeness. The book never used those words, but it described the same path. The more you become your true self, not the mask, not the role, but the deep essence beneath, the more your life reflects clarity, wealth, harmony. The noble class had a secret. Their power wasn't only political, it was energetic, and they protected the Liber Fortunae, the noble path to divine wealth, fiercely, because it gave them access to the deeper, invisible forces that shape reality. Imagine a world where your wealth is not determined by effort alone, but by the energy you carry. Imagine waking up and feeling full before the day even begins. This was the kind of wealth the book was pointing toward, and those who practiced its teachings, who truly lived them, found that doors opened easily, partnerships flowed naturally, and even their enemies lost their edge. That's the power of Aurum Cordis. It doesn't shout, it doesn't fight, it simply radiates, and everything changes in its presence. The lesson is as alive now as it was then. You can begin to feel into this gold of the heart. You don't need a castle. You only need the quiet willingness to pause, to soften, and to let your own deeper nature come forward. The world will feel it, and when it does, it will begin to respond. This is the beginning of true aristocracy, not of blood, but of spirit. And it all starts with one question whispered into the heart. How would wealth move through me if I already felt full? The answer to that, dear reader, may just be your Aurum Cordis. Ending the chapter, you're greeted with the next, Aurum Silentium. Chapter 3, Aurum Silentium, the Gold of Silence. The third chapter begins with the retelling of a story of a man searching high and low for treasure. He scours distant lands, scales mountains, crosses deserts, and listens to every rumor of gold and fortune. But in the end, the treasure is found buried beneath his own home, in the very soil he walked over every day, unaware. This is the parable of the hidden treasure, found in various sacred texts and passed down through time, not just as a lesson about seeking, but about where to seek. And this is precisely what the third chapter of Liber Fortunae speaks to, the wealth that arises from stillness, from silence, from turning inward instead of chasing outward. Aurum Silentium teaches that the most refined form of wealth is born not in noise, action, or outward ambition, but in stillness, in restraint, in the subtle power of quiet alignment. To modern ears, it might sound almost counterintuitive. We are taught to hustle, to speak loudly, to network, to make our presence known. But the aristocrats who followed this ancient book practiced something else entirely. They learned to harness what the text calls divina frequentia, or divine frequency, which could only be attuned to when the mind grew silent, not distracted, not desperate, silent. There's a reason this part of the book was written in deliberately spaced script, with gaps between each passage. The spacing itself was part of the ritual, a visual representation of pause, of breath, of waiting. The silence between words was as sacred as the words themselves. It was believed that if one read the chapter too fast, the teachings would vanish like smoke. You had to slow down. You had to be slow. That was the first lesson. The second was more hidden. It whispered that true wealth flows toward clarity, and clarity only arrives when the waters of the mind are still. Imagine a lake on a windy day. Its surface ripples, distorts, and confuses. You cannot see through it. But when the wind stops and the lake stills, suddenly it becomes a mirror. Not only do you see clearly through the water, but you also see yourself. In that reflection, the early aristocrats claimed, came the first vision of divine instruction: what to build, where to invest, whom to trust, when to wait. All guidance flowed from that mirror of the soul. But it could only speak when the world inside you had grown quiet. So they practiced silence, not just externally but internally. They called it internal nobility, the ability to sit in a room, say nothing, and yet shift the energy of the space by sheer presence. Some would spend whole mornings in seated contemplation, facing east, because the sun's first light was believed to thin the veil between the mundane and the divine. That's when inspiration was strongest, not because it was given, but because it could finally be heard. Modern mystics often speak of this too. Neville Goddard described the secret place of the Most High, and Jung spoke of the deep unconscious as a vast well of symbolic knowing that could only be accessed through inner stillness. Even Tesla, who once said that all matter is vibration, reportedly had moments of total silence where ideas flooded his mind with blueprints already formed. He didn't chase the idea. It arrived in silence. Aurum Silentium is the instruction manual for that state. Its teachings are gentle, yet exacting. One must withdraw just enough, not from life, but from noise. The book outlines practices of sacred silence that included dawn fasting, breath retention, and intentional solitude in candlelit rooms designed to mimic the light of the stars. They knew something about the mind that modern science is only beginning to prove. The brain reorganizes itself in stillness. Solutions rise. Patterns emerge. The unseen becomes visible. They even believed that money responded to stillness. It would appear in the form of a sudden opportunity, an overheard conversation, a letter from someone long forgotten, but only when one was still enough to notice. They didn't believe in chasing. They believed in receiving. And that meant being tuned in, not turned up. This is not passivity. It is precision. Just as an archer must be still to strike true, so too must you. The more still you are inside, the clearer the path outside becomes. Not because the world changes, but because you begin to see it differently. Possibilities that were hidden become obvious. Wealth stops being a chase and starts being a natural consequence of inner calm. There is power in this silence, but it is quiet power, the kind that doesn't need applause or recognition, the kind that walks into a room and says nothing, yet everyone turns, the kind that doesn't beg for abundance because it already knows it is worthy. This is the gold of silence. It glows from within. It doesn't shout. It radiates. In this chapter of Liber Fortunae, silence is not absence. It is presence. It is the field where wealth can grow without being forced. The soil is where divine timing, right action, and unexpected grace all take root. And as the parable reminds us, the treasure isn't far. It's buried beneath the surface of your own being, waiting not for noise but for quiet. So perhaps the next time you're overwhelmed or rushing or pushing, ask yourself instead, can I be still? Can I listen instead of speaking? Can I trust the current to carry me instead of trying to paddle upstream? If so, you are already practicing Aurum Silentium. And soon, you will see that silence was never empty. It was the beginning of wealth. This goes hand in hand with the teachings of Chapter 4, Aurum Quietum. Chapter 4, Aurum Quietum, the gold of stillness. The book explains that this inner silence is not passive. It is magnetic. Just as gold doesn't shout but still holds immense value, so too does the mind that dwells in peace naturally draw others toward it. Think of the archetype of the wise king or queen. They don't run around yelling commands. They sit calmly, and the entire court listens. Their power comes from their grounded presence. They are wealthy not just in gold, but in attention, trust, and influence, all of which are currencies more potent than coin. To understand this principle, you must first pause. Feel what happens when you stop chasing, even just for a moment. In stillness, your energy stops scattering, your thoughts stop spiraling outward. Your spirit, once restless, begins to gather itself like a river returning to its source. The great masters of old believed this stillness was not emptiness, it was potential, waiting. The wealth of the future, they wrote, gathers around the one who knows how to stop long enough to receive. The Codex book explains that the breath is the bridge between chaos and calm, between fear and flow. It includes simple breathing patterns that resemble what we now call box breathing or alternate nostril breathing, tools used today in both yoga and neuroscience to reset the nervous system. When the breath is steady, the mind becomes clear. And when the mind is clear, decisions are sharper, intuition is stronger, and wealth flows more easily toward what is grounded and stable. Carl Jung also spoke of the archetype of the hermit, the wise inner figure who steps back from the noise of the world, not to escape, but to see clearly. The hermit knows that insight doesn't come when we are distracted. It comes when we go inward, into the cave of quiet. The aristocrats treated their reading of Aurum Quietum as a sacred pause, a moment each day where they silenced the external world and reconnected with something deeper. In that silence, many claimed to receive sudden ideas, creative breakthroughs, or even unexpected gifts. Letters would arrive with good news. People would offer help out of the blue. The book called these blessings the return of the current. When you stop paddling against the river, it brings back to you everything you were straining for. There is also something sacred about not needing to prove anything. The book warns about the desire to be seen as wealthy, which often blocks the energy of true abundance. The need to impress others or show off riches was seen as a form of inner poverty. But the aristocrat who embodied Aurum Quietum did not dress in showy garments or flaunt their success. Their wealth moved in quiet ways. It showed up in the serenity of their homes, the loyalty of their staff, the ease of their choices. They did not try to sell their worth to the world. The world simply responded to their calm authority with generosity. This chapter reminds us of something many of us forget in today's world of non-stop goals and productivity. Sometimes the richest thing you can do is to stop, breathe, and listen. Wealth doesn't only flow through hustle. Often it arrives during stillness, when your nervous system relaxes, when your energy no longer leaks through worry, and when you no longer need something to happen right now. In stillness, time bends. Synchronicities find you. People call with news. Opportunities rise not because you forced them, but because you finally became the kind of person who could hold them. The modern world rarely teaches this, but the aristocrats protected it as a secret worth guarding. They passed it down not through lectures but through ritual. They practiced silence in gardens. They meditated before making decisions. They surrounded themselves with symbols of peace, stone fountains, soft fabrics, warm light, not as decoration, but as reminders. Because when the soul is at rest, it opens, and when it opens, life flows in. Wealth, as the book teaches, does not respond to noise. It responds to resonance, and resonance is born in stillness. You don't need to run faster. You don't need to prove your worth. You need to become still enough to remember who you are. That stillness, that rooted knowing, is the rarest kind of gold. Aurum Quietum, the gold of stillness, the wealth that can't be taken because it was never outside of you to begin with. As we arrive at chapter 5, we delve into the realm of the occult. Chapter 5, Aurum Veritas, the gold that cannot rust. This chapter was hidden between verses, never named directly, but those who understood symbols could hear it whispering from every line. The aristocrats of the 16th century who studied the book were not simply after coin or crowns. They sought what they called the Aurum Veritas, the true gold. It was a kind of inner alchemy, the kind that would not tarnish with time nor rot in vaults, because once this gold was awakened inside you, the world would begin to reflect it on the outside. Gold would come, but only after you stopped chasing it like a beggar and stood tall like a sovereign who already owned the vault. Aurum Veritas is the teaching of embodiment, of becoming the vibration you wish to receive. And this ancient teaching is echoed in many corners of the world. In Vedic philosophy, they speak of Ritam, the cosmic order, a rhythm you align with, not control. In Hermeticism, the principle of correspondence reminds us that, as within, so without. And in the Jungian archetypes, the king is not a man with wealth, but one whose inner kingdom is ordered, strong, and still. That energy calls forth provision, not through force, but through field. In the book, the teaching is disguised in a simple tale. A young noble is told to find the gold hidden in the family garden. He digs for days, blistered and angry, never finding coin. But as seasons pass and the soil softens, what rises from that earth is not metal, but fruit, grapes, wheat, healing herbs. He fed the village for years. Only then did he see the treasure was never under the ground, but above it. He had cultivated the land, which in turn cultivated him. That's what Aurum Veritas teaches. You don't dig for gold, you become fertile soil. You don't chase money, you prepare to carry its weight. Because true wealth is like rain, it only pools where the land is ready. In practical terms, the aristocrats had daily rituals, not just of prayer, but of presence. They would wake early before the clamor of the estate and speak aloud a phrase found in the margins of the book, Fiat lux intus, let there be light within. They believed light must fill the house before treasure can be stored. This was not a metaphor to them. It was physics, vibration, a frequency that could not be faked, only forged. One of the most guarded practices involved how they spoke about wealth. No word of desperation was allowed in their chambers, not because they were prideful, but because they believed that speaking from poverty reinforced a bond to it. In contrast, they practiced speaking from fullness, describing wealth as if it were already present. "I bless the gold that arrives without effort," one lord was noted to say each morning. "I bless the lands that know my name." Not ego, alignment. And again, Tesla's truth echoes here too. If you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. The old book never used those exact words, but its pages vibrated with the same knowing. The aristocrats weren't just born into wealth. They tuned themselves to its music. And just like tuning forks, reality began to echo back. But this chapter also warns of corruption, that if the gold you attract doesn't match the gold within, it will rust in your hands. There are stories, written more like parables, of lords who took shortcuts, who sought outer gold without refining their spirit. Their fortunes turned to curses. Their sons fought over coins. Their houses crumbled in betrayal. The book doesn't name them, but it calls this false gold, that which glitters but cannot warm. To guard against this, the practitioners of Aurum Veritas were taught to give, not as a transaction, but as a purification. Giving to them was a way of loosening attachment and proving to the spirit that you trust its returns. Like a tree letting go of leaves in autumn, knowing spring will come. They believed when you give from joy, you multiply. When you give from fear, you divide. There's an almost eerie resemblance here to Native American beliefs around the sacred hoop. To many tribes, the circle of life was not just nature, but the economy. What is given must return, and what is hoarded dies. Wealth was measured not in stockpiles, but in flow, and flow in both traditions requires rhythm, and rhythm requires listening. So how do you listen? The book hints, softly again and again, stillness. A noble heart is not a loud one. A ready vessel doesn't shout, it opens. The rituals of this chapter don't teach conquest. They teach cultivation, quiet mornings, words of power, gentle service, the kind of living that prepares you to receive without guilt and release without fear. Because the true aristocrat, they believed, was one who ruled his inner state before ever touching a crown. This is why Aurum Veritas was not taught in schools or sung in public. It was passed hand to hand from one ready soul to another. And if you're reading this, you may be one of them, not because of your bloodline, but because your soul is beginning to remember the gold that cannot rust. The next chapter awaits, and in it, another name, another secret. But for now, speak it once. Fiat lux intus, let there be light within. The soil is soft, the fruit is waiting. Chapter 6. Gloria Interioris, the hidden crown of wealth. The final pages of Liber Fortunae do not speak of gold or land or power as the world sees them. Instead, they guide the seeker toward the deepest vault, the inner chamber where divine glory lives in stillness. The sixth chapter, Gloria Interioris, or the inner glory, is perhaps the most secret and protected teaching of the aristocrats who followed the noble path, for it taught them not only how to gather wealth, but how to become it. Gloria Interioris teaches that the soul must become like still water. Just as a mirror reflects most clearly when it is clean and still, the soul reflects divine wealth most easily when it is free of noise, shame, and constant desire. This is why earlier chapters warned against desperation and attachment, because they stir the waters. The final chapter is about becoming clear. The seekers of old were trained in practicing generosity with the same focus a warrior practices swordplay. They meditated while walking in gardens. They gave thanks before every meal, not out of habit, but as a ritual to charge their food with intention. Even in moments of grief, they trained their minds to look for beauty, believing that a soul attuned to beauty would always be a magnet for grace. Many of these nobles, especially those trained in the hidden abbeys of the north, believed that glory was something that rose from within when the outer layers of falsehood were peeled away. The ego in this teaching was seen as a dust covering the jewel. To polish the jewel, one had to see through the illusions, fear of loss, craving for recognition, or the false belief that one is separate from abundance itself. Interestingly, this echoes teachings from the East. In the Upanishads it is said, "From joy we have come, in joy we live and move, and unto joy we shall return." The same golden thread runs through Liber Fortunae. If you wish to walk in divine wealth, you must become a container for joy, not the loud, fleeting kind, but the deep and humming joy that comes from knowing who you really are. Carl Jung spoke of the self as a mandala, the whole being greater than the ego. When one connects to this deeper self, archetypes awaken: the wise king, the abundant mother, the inner healer. These archetypes live within all of us, but they must be called forth through acts of devotion and awareness. In the final teachings of the book, initiates were invited to wear certain rings not for decoration, but to remind them of which archetype they were awakening that day. One ring might symbolize Jupiter, the bringer of expansion and divine rulership. Another might bear a lion for courage and noble leadership. In modern terms, these were symbolic affirmations woven into daily life, meant to tune the body and mind to a higher vibration. But Gloria Interioris also teaches something harder. It speaks of invisible storms, those times when wealth seems to vanish, when things fall apart and the soul feels abandoned. The text explains that these storms are not punishments, but purifications. Just as gold is placed in fire to be refined, the soul passes through trials to become transparent, so it can hold more light. This is where many seekers fall. They cling to what is being burned away. But the wise know, let it go, and something better takes its place. There's a passage, handwritten in faded ink in the margin of one ancient copy, that says, "He who clutches what fades will miss what is eternal. He who stands still will see the gates open." The final lesson of the book is not about doing, it is about becoming. It asks the reader to ask themselves, can you sit still in the center of the storm? Can you be faithful to your soul's truth even when no one applauds? Can you let go of needing more long enough to realize you already have what you seek? In Native American tradition, especially among the Lakota and Hopi, there is the belief that the richest one is the one who gives the most. Wealth is not measured by what you store, but by what you circulate. This is not unlike the final lesson in Gloria Interioris, which describes true wealth as breath, something that must be taken in with gratitude, then released with trust. If you try to hold it, you suffocate. But if you live in flow, you are always filled. So here, at the end of the noble path, there is no final reward handed down, no treasure chest, no last ritual to complete. There is only you, your spirit, your breath, your awareness, and the invitation to stop seeking and start remembering. You were always the treasure. The medieval nobles knew this, the quiet ones, the ones who smiled softly when others boasted. They had read the book, they had walked the path, and they had seen it for themselves. The final gate does not open with gold. It opens with stillness, with presence, with a heart that has let go of striving and now simply shines. Liber Fortunae was not a manual for greed. It was a whisper passed from hand to hand saying, "You are already divine, but will you dare to live as if you knew?" That is the final secret. The crown is invisible, but it has always been yours. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.